Midnight patrol dead quiet. Kale liked it that way. The hum of the graph skimmer was a low thrum beneath his boots, a familiar vibration that meant solitude. He scanned the jagged horizon of Xylos, a rock the corporations had bled dry and abandoned a century ago. Smog-choked clouds hung low, stained orange by the distant, failing glow of Titan Prime's refineries. Just another rotation. Check the perimeter sensors, kick a few rocks, go back to his hole, and drink recycled water that tasted of ozone and regret. A flicker on the scanner. Not a rock. Not a dust rat. It was biological, and it was moving fast. He cut the skimmer's engine, dropping it silently behind a ridge of slag glass. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the grit-laced wind. He drew his pulse rifle, the weapon's weight a comfort in his hands. He moved low, boots crunching softly on the metallic dust. Voices. Harsh, guttural. Not corporate enforcers. Their language was clicks and whistles, sharp and alien. He crested the ridge, going prone. Down in the gully, 3 of them. Tall, armored in black chitin that drank the dim light. They carried plasma casters, the muzzles glowing with barely contained energy. They had someone cornered. A woman. She was backed against a rusted hulk of a delivery truck, a relic from the moon's brief period of prosperity. Her clothes were torn, a dark blue substance staining the fabric on her side. Not red. Blue. Her skin had a faint, silvery sheen under the chemical haze. Her ears were tapered to a delicate point, and her hair, the color of spun moonlight, was matted with grime and that same blue blood. She held a wicked-looking blade, curved and serrated, and her stance was pure defiance. Even from this distance, Kale could see the fire in her eyes. They were a cool, slate gray, but they promised violence. One of the armored figures barked an order. The other 2 raised their casters. She hissed, a sound that was not quite human, and lunged. She was fast, impossibly fast. The blade was a silver blur, gutting the first one before he could fire. He went down with a wet shriek, black armor cracking open. The second one fired. A bolt of white-hot plasma screamed past her, melting a crater in the side of the truck. She used the moment, driving her shoulder into his chest, knocking him off balance. Her knife found the joint between his helmet and cuirass. Another wet sound. The third one was smarter. He kept his distance, firing measured shots that forced her back. She winced, her movements becoming slower. The wound in her side. She was losing too much blood. She stumbled, catching herself on the rusted metal. The hunter grinned, a flash of too many teeth, and leveled his caster for the final shot. Kale didn't think. He just acted. His pulse rifle was already sighted. He squeezed the trigger. A high-energy particle beam, invisible to the naked eye, hit the hunter square in the back. The chitin armor flash-boiled. The hunter stiffened, a surprised grunt escaping his mandibles, and then he simply fell apart. A pile of smoking, carbonized pieces. Silence returned to the gully. The woman stared at the remains of her attacker. Then her head snapped up, eyes scanning the ridge. They found him instantly. Those gray eyes locked onto his, narrowed with suspicion. Kale rose slowly, rifle held in a low-ready position. He started down the slope, boots skidding on loose scree. She didn't relax. If anything, she tensed further, her knuckles white on the hilt of her blade. He stopped 10 feet away from her. The air smelled of ozone, burnt alien flesh, and her strange, metallic blood. "You're hurt," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. She just watched him, her breathing shallow. "I didn't need your help," she finally said, her voice a low, melodic rasp. The accent was strange, but the words were clear standard. "Looked like you did," he countered, gesturing with his chin at the puddle of blue forming at her feet. She glanced down, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "It is a scratch. That scratch is going to kill you if you don't patch it." He took a step closer. The tip of her blade came up, aimed at his throat. "Stay back, human." He stopped. "Suit yourself," he said, shrugging. "Bleed out here. The dust rats will pick your bones clean." He turned to leave. A moment of hesitation. He hated it. That part of him that wouldn't let things go, the part that got him into trouble in the Corps. He sighed, a quiet exhalation of self-disgust, and turned back. Her eyes were still on him, but there was a waver in her stance now. The bravado was failing. The blood loss was catching up. "Look," he said, his tone flat. "I've got a medkit. Antiseptic, Synth skin. It'll stop the bleeding. I do not trust you. I don't care, he said. But I just saved your life. You can either trust me for 5 minutes, or you can die. She swayed. The knife drooped. He moved then, closing the distance before she could protest again. He holstered his rifle and reached for her. She flinched, trying to bring the knife back up, but her arm had no strength. He caught her wrist. Her skin was cool to the touch. Easy, he grunted. He gently pried the blade from her fingers and tucked it into his own belt. She glared at him, a look of pure fury, but she was too weak to fight. He ripped a piece of her tunic to get a better look at the wound. It was a deep plasma score along her ribs, cauterized at the edges but weeping fluid. Bad. This needs more than a patch, he muttered. Without another word, he scooped her up into his arms. She was surprisingly light, all lean muscle and fine bone. She let out a sharp cry of protest, struggling weakly against his hold. Put me down. No. He started walking back toward the ridge where he'd left the skimmer. I command you. He almost laughed. I don't take commands, he said, his boots finding purchase on the slope. Not anymore. Her struggles ceased. She went limp in his arms, her head falling against his chest. He thought she'd passed out, but then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Where are you taking me? Someplace safe, he said. There is no safe place. He didn't have an answer for that. He just kept climbing. His hideout was a relic, a repurposed terraforming control bunker buried deep in a canyon. The blast door hissed open at his approach, scanning his biometrics before retracting into the rock. Inside was cold, functional. Polished concrete floors, bare metal walls, a single cot, a weapon-cleaning bench, a small nutrient paste dispenser. Home. He carried her past the airlock and set her down on the cot. It was the only soft surface in the entire bunker. She immediately tried to sit up, her hand going to her side with a gasp of pain. Stay down, he ordered, pushing her gently but firmly back. He went to a storage locker and pulled out a heavy-duty medkit, the kind they gave to frontline Marines. He brought it over and knelt beside the cot. She watched his every move, her gray eyes filled with a mixture of pain and distrust. I need to cut this away, he said, indicating the torn, blood-soaked fabric of her tunic. She stared at him for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. He took out a pair of trauma shears and carefully cut the material away from the wound. The silvery skin of her torso was marred by the angry, weeping burn. He worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with antiseptic spray. She hissed as the cold foam hit her skin, but didn't cry out. Her control was impressive. He took out a dermal regenerator. It looked like a small pistol, but instead of bullets, it sprayed a fine mist of cultured cells and bonding agents. This will sting, he warned. I am not a child, she snapped. He activated the device. The fine spray covered the wound, and he watched as the synth skin latticework began to form, knitting the damaged flesh back together. It was a temporary fix, but it would hold. It would stop the bleeding. He finished and put the regenerator away. He looked at her face. Her eyes were closed, her jaw clenched tight. The color had drained from her face, leaving her skin looking almost translucent. He grabbed a ration pack and a water bulb and put them on the floor beside the cot. Eat, he said. Drink. She opened her eyes. They were clouded with exhaustion. Why? She whispered. Why what? Why help me? He stood up, turning away to rack his rifle on the wall mount. He didn't have a good answer. I don't like seeing things left unfinished, he said finally. They started it. I finished it. It was a half-truth. The real reason was something he didn't want to examine too closely. It was the way she fought. The way she stood her ground against impossible odds. It reminded him of people he used to know. People who were long dead. He heard a rustle behind him and turned back. She had pushed herself into a sitting position, leaning against the cold metal wall. She was holding the water bulb, taking a small, tentative sip. What is your name, human? She asked. Kale. I am Lyra. She said her name like it was a title, like it should mean something to him. It didn't. Rest, Lyra, he said. You're safe here for now. Her lips twisted into a bitter smile. No one who is hunted is ever safe. He couldn't argue with that either. He left her and went to the main console, checking the perimeter sensors. Nothing. The gully where he'd found her was empty. The bodies were gone. No, not gone. Dissolved. The black chitin armor was designed to self-immolate on the wearer's death, leaving no trace. Smart. Clean. Professional. Whoever was hunting her, they weren't amateurs. He spent the next few hours in a state of heightened alert. He cleaned his weapons, ran diagnostics on the bunker's defense systems, and kept one eye on the sensor feed. Lyra eventually succumbed to exhaustion. Her breathing evened out, and she slumped sideways, asleep. In sleep, she looked younger, less like a cornered warrior and more like someone who had been running for a very long time. The lines of tension around her mouth and eyes softened. He found a thermal blanket in a storage crate and draped it over her. He didn't know why. The bunker was climate-controlled. It was a useless gesture, an illogical, sentimental impulse. He hated it. He took up a watch position in a chair near the blast door, his rifle across his lap. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not tonight. The alert chimed just before dawn. A single, piercing note that cut through the bunker's low hum. Cale was on his feet instantly, his rifle shouldered. On the main screen, the sensor feed showed a single, large transport descending from the upper atmosphere. It was military-grade, sleek and black, with no identifying marks. It was heading for his sector. Lyra was awake. She was sitting up on the cot, her hand pressed against her bandaged side. Her gray eyes were wide and sharp, fixed on the screen. "They found me," she said. It was not a question. "They found us," he corrected her. The transport landed a click away from the bunker's location. A ramp lowered, and a squad of 10 figures in that same black chitin armor disembarked. They moved with disciplined precision, fanning out and starting a sweep of the area. "How?" she asked, her voice tight. "How did they track me?" "Maybe they tracked the ones I killed," he said, his mind racing. "Maybe it's you. You have a tracker on you." She shook her head. "I destroyed it days ago. Then they're just thorough." He watched them on the screen. They were getting closer. Their helmets would have sophisticated scanners. They would find the bunker's EM signature eventually, no matter how well it was shielded. A comm channel opened. Unencrypted. They were hailing him. "Unidentified resident." A synthesized voice crackled through the speakers. "This is a restricted military zone. We are conducting a search for a fugitive. State your identity and purpose." Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. This was it. The moment of truth. He could give her up. Tell them she was here. They would take her and leave, and he could go back to his quiet, empty life. It was the logical choice. The smart choice. The choice a survivor would make. He looked at her, at the defiance still burning in her eyes despite the pain and the fear she tried to hide. He thought of her fighting 3 of them alone in that gully. He thought of the dead look in the eyes of the corporate enforcers he used to serve with. He keyed the comm. "This is Cale, Reclamation License 734, he said, his voice a low gravel. "I'm a licensed scavenger. This sector is my claim." "We are aware of your claim," the voice replied. "Have you seen anyone in this sector?" "A female, non-human, silvery complexion. She is considered armed and extremely dangerous." Cale glanced at Lyra. Her breath hitched. He made the choice. "I found a body," he said, the lie coming easily. "Matched that description. Looked like she ran foul of a pack of sand scorpions. Wasn't much left." There was a pause. "Where is this body now?" "Burned it," Cale said. "Local quarantine regs. Don't want any alien plague spreading." He pointed a remote camera at a patch of ground outside the bunker where he'd incinerated some garbage the day before. The scorched earth looked convincing enough. Another long pause. He could almost feel them analyzing his words, his tone, the visual data. "Very well, scavenger," the voice said finally. "Maintain your position. Do not interfere. We will continue our sweep and be out of your sector shortly." The channel closed. Cale watched the screen. The squad of hunters paused their advance. Their leader seemed to be conferring with the ship. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, they turned and started marching back to their transport. He didn't relax until the ship lifted off, its engines blasting superheated air, and ascended back into the toxic clouds. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. He turned to look at Lyra. She was staring at him, her expression one of profound shock. "You lied," she whispered. "I did. For me. Don't get used to it," he grunted, turning back to the console to monitor the ship's departure. He felt her presence behind him. She had gotten off the cot and walked silently across the concrete floor. "Why?" she asked again, her voice closer now. He didn't turn around. "I told you," he said. "I don't like leaving things unfinished. That is not the reason. It's the only one you're getting." He felt a light touch on his arm. He flinched, surprised by the contact. He looked down at her hand. Her fingers were long and slender, her skin cool against his. "You have made a powerful enemy today, Kale," she said softly. "And for no reason. They were already my enemies," he said, pulling his arm away. "I just didn't know their names yet." He finally turned to face her. "So who are you, Lyra?" he asked. "Why are they hunting a princess with a whole damn army?" He'd added the princess part as a guess, a sarcastic jab. But she didn't deny it. Her expression tightened. "I am Lyra the Arena," she said, her voice regaining some of its regal authority. "Of the blood royal of the Kalan Empire." Kale stared at her. He'd heard of the Kalan, a fierce, insular species from the core systems, masters of genetic engineering and silent conquest. Legends said their empresses were bred to be perfect warriors and strategists. "You're a long way from home," he said. "I was betrayed," she said, her voice laced with venom. "By my own kin. Lord Forlag, my cousin, staged a coup. He killed my sisters and declared himself regent." "Sisters?" "My guard. My counsel," she corrected herself, a flicker of deep pain in her eyes. "He claimed I was unfit to rule. Weak. He hunts me to consolidate his power. My death will make his claim absolute." So that was it. Not just a fugitive. A queen in exile. He had just lied to a military force loyal to a usurper king to protect the one person who could challenge his throne. His life had just become infinitely more complicated. "Great," he muttered, running a hand over his tired face. "Royal politics. Just what I needed." "You can still give me up," she offered, her tone challenging. "Call them back. Tell them you made a mistake." He met her gaze. "No," he said. "I finished that conversation." A new dynamic settled between them in the silence that followed. The distrust was still there, but it was now overlaid with a fragile, unspoken alliance. He was in this now, whether he liked it or not. Over the next few days, a tense routine formed. Kale kept watch, maintained the bunker's systems, and tried to pretend his life hadn't been upended. Lyra recovered. Her alien physiology was remarkable. The wound that would have laid a human low for weeks was little more than a puckered, silvery scar on her side in less than 3 rotations. Her strength returned, and with it, her pride. They spoke little. The bunker was too small for arguments, so they communicated in clipped, functional sentences. "More water." "Yes." "Sensor sweep is clear." "Good." But he was always aware of her. He watched her as she paced the confines of the bunker, her movements fluid and predatory, like a caged panther. He watched her as she sharpened her serrated blade on a whetstone she'd produced from a hidden pocket, the rhythmic scrape of metal on stone filling the silence. He felt her eyes on him when his back was turned. Assessing. Judging. One night, he woke from a light sleep in his chair to find her standing over him. He didn't move, didn't even tense. He just opened his eyes and looked up at her. She was holding her knife, the tip pointed down at his heart. Her face was a mask in the dim light of the consoles. "You sleep like a man with nothing to fear," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Or a man who's too tired to care," he replied, his voice calm. "I could kill you right now," she stated. "Take your supplies, your ship. Be gone before morning." "You could," he agreed. "But you won't." "What makes you so certain, human?" "Because you're not a murderer," he said. "You're a soldier. You kill enemies, not allies." Her eyes narrowed. "I never said we were allies." "You didn't have to," he said. "The moment I lied for you, we were. You're stuck with me." She held his gaze for a long moment, the knife unwavering. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the ingrained suspicion warring with a reluctant, nascent trust. Finally, with a sigh that sounded like defeat, she lowered the blade. "You are a strange creature, Kale," she said, stepping back. "I've been called worse." She went back to her cot, but he knew neither of them would be sleeping much more that night. The test had been passed. The unspoken question answered. A few days later, he found her staring at a small, intricate device she held in her palm. It was a silver locket, etched with alien script. He saw a tear trace a path through the grime on her cheek. It was the first crack he'd seen in her armor. The first sign of vulnerability since that first night. He walked over, holding out a clean rag. "Your sisters?" he asked quietly. She snapped the locket shut, her composure returning instantly. She wiped the tear away with the back of her hand, ignoring his offering. "I told you they were dead," she said, her voice brittle. "You told me Forlag killed them," he corrected her. "But your eyes told a different story. You think at least one of them is alive." She turned away from him, her shoulders rigid. What would you know of loss? Human, she spat. You live in this tomb by choice. You have no 1 inch. The words hit a nerve he thought was long dead. I had a squad once, he said, his voice flat and empty. On Cygnus X-1. Corporate war. We were ordered to hold a position that couldn't be held. Command called it a strategic sacrifice. I called it a slaughter. He stared at the blank metal wall, seeing faces he hadn't allowed himself to remember in years. I was the only one who walked away, he finished. So don't talk to me about loss. The silence in the bunker was absolute. He had said more to her in that moment than he had said to anyone in 5 years. He felt exposed. Raw. He turned to leave, to put space between them, but she spoke again, her voice softer this time. Xylia, she said. My eldest sister. She was the shield of the throne. The fiercest warrior I have ever known. Forlag's assassins ambushed us in the Spire Gardens. She held them off so I could escape. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. I saw her fall, she whispered. But I did not see her die. I have to believe she survived. I have to. He understood. Hope was a weapon. Sometimes, it was the only one you had left. He sat down on a crate near her cot, a silent offering of shared grief. She didn't look at him, but she didn't tell him to leave either. They sat in silence for a long time, two lonely soldiers from different worlds, bound by the ghosts they carried. The air between them changed after that. The tension was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer just about suspicion. It was something else now. Something sharper, more electric. He found himself watching the way the dim light caught the silver in her hair, the way her muscles moved beneath her skin when she practiced her fighting forms. The intensity in her gray eyes when she looked at him, a look that was no longer just assessing his threat level, but something deeper, more personal. One evening, he was calibrating the skimmer's engine, his hands covered in grease. She came to stand in the doorway of the small workshop bay. You think they will come back, she stated. They will, he said, not looking up from his work. People like that don't give up. They'll reskin the sector. They'll find something they missed. So we are just waiting to die. I'm not waiting, he said, tightening a coolant valve with a wrench. I'm preparing. She walked closer, her eyes tracing the lines of his bare arms, the scars that crisscrossed his skin. You are a warrior, she said. Like my sister. I was a mechanic, he grunted. They just gave me a gun. You lie, she said, her voice a low purr. You move like a blade. You think like a hunter. It is in your blood. She was standing very close now. He could smell the faint, alien scent of her skin, something like ozone and night-blooming flowers. He stopped working and slowly straightened up, turning to face her. The space between them was suddenly charged, thick with unspoken things. What do you want, Lyra? He asked, his voice rough. I do not know, she admitted, her gaze dropping to his mouth. You confuse me, Kale. The feeling's mutual. You fight for a queen you do not know. You protect a stranger who brought death to your door, she murmured, stepping closer still. You ask for nothing in return. Maybe I'm not as smart as you think. Or maybe, she whispered, her hand coming up to touch his chest, her fingers tracing the edge of an old burned scar. You are simply a man of honor. A concept I thought was extinct in this part of the galaxy. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He could feel the heat of her palm through his shirt. Honor gets you killed, he said, his voice strained. So does loneliness, she countered. Her gray eyes, now burning with a silvery light, met his. And in that moment, the tension that had been building for days finally snapped. He didn't know who moved first. His hands were suddenly on her waist, pulling her flush against him. Her arms wrapped around his neck, her fingers tangling in his short hair. His mouth came down on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision, a desperate, ravenous claiming. It was all the fear, the anger, the loneliness, the unspoken words of the past weeks, all poured into a single, brutal act. She met his ferocity with her own, her lips hard and demanding against his. Her nails dug into his scalp, and a low growl rumbled in her chest. He lifted her effortlessly, her legs wrapping around his waist as he kicked the workshop door shut and carried her back into the main living area. He pressed her against the cold metal wall, his mouth never leaving hers. It was a battle, a fight for dominance that neither of them wanted to win. He tore at the rough fabric of her clothes, and she ripped at his shirt, the sound of tearing cloth echoing in the silent bunker. Skin met skin. His, warm and scarred. Hers, cool and impossibly smooth. There were no words. There was no need for them. This was a different kind of language, a primal communication of need and instinct. He laid her down on the cot, the thin mattress groaning in protest. He looked down at her, at the queen of a distant empire, laid bare before him. Her silver-sheen skin seemed to glow in the dim light. Her eyes were dark pools of desire, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. "Kale," she breathed, her voice a plea and a command all in one. He came down to her, and the universe narrowed to the confines of that small cot in that hidden bunker on a forgotten moon. After, they lay tangled in the thermal blanket, the silence of the bunker settling around them once more. It was a different kind of silence now. Not empty, but full. Lyra traced the jagged line of a scar on his shoulder with one finger. "I do not do this," she said softly, as if to herself. "Me neither," he replied, his voice a low rumble in the quiet. She turned her head on his chest to look at him. "This changes nothing," she said, her regal pride reasserting itself. "I still have a war to fight, a throne to reclaim. I know, and you are still a human scavenger, hiding at the edge of the galaxy. I know that too." She paused. "But it changes everything," she whispered, a note of wonder in her voice. He tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer. "Yeah," he said, "it does." Their new dynamic was sealed not with a treaty, but with a shared, desperate intimacy. They were no longer just allies of circumstance. They were something more, something undefined and dangerous. The attack came 3 days later. It was sudden and overwhelming. No warning, no ship on the sensors. One moment, the bunker was silent. The next, a shaped charge blew the main blast door off its hinges, sending a shower of molten metal into the room. Kale reacted on pure instinct, rolling off the cot and dragging Lyra with him, shielding her body with his own as shrapnel tore through the air. He came up with his pulse rifle in hand, shoving her toward the back maintenance tunnel. "Go," he yelled over the ringing in his ears. Forlag's reavers poured through the breach, their black armor gleaming. This time, there were 20 of them. Kale opened fire, a sustained burst of particle energy that stitched across the first 3, turning them into clouds of superheated ash. Lyra was not running. She had her blade in her hand, her back against his, a mirror of his own combat stance. "I do not run," she snarled. "Didn't think you would," he grunted, slamming a fresh power cell into his rifle. They fought, back to back, a whirlwind of deadly efficiency. His rifle spat invisible death, each shot precise, economical. Her blade was a silver arc of destruction, weaving through plasma bolts to find the weak points in the Reaver's armor. They moved together as if they had trained for years. He would fire, forcing a Reaver to take cover, and she would be there a second later, her blade slicing through a neck or a knee joint. She would engage too in close combat, and he would drop the one trying to flank her from a distance. It was a brutal, beautiful dance of death, but there were too many of them. A plasma bolt caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The pain was a white-hot flash. His arm went numb. He dropped to one knee. "Kale," Lyra cried out, her voice sharp with alarm. She put herself in front of him, a furious shield of silver and steel, her blade a blur as she held off 3 Reavers at once. He grit his teeth, forcing himself up. His rifle was gone, knocked from his grasp. He drew his combat knife. Another explosion rocked the bunker. The ceiling started to collapse. "The tunnel," he shouted, grabbing her arm. Now, this time, she listened. They scrambled for the maintenance hatch as the bunker began to implode around them. A Reaver lunged, and Kale threw his knife, burying it in the creature's throat. He shoved Lyra through the narrow opening and dived in after her, just as a massive support beam crashed down where they had been standing. The tunnel was plunged into darkness and the sound of grinding rock. His sanctuary was gone. His home for the last 5 years, erased in 5 minutes. He didn't have time to mourn it. He activated the emergency light on his wrist comm, casting a weak glow down the narrow passage. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice strained with pain. Lyra was already examining his shoulder. "It is bad," she said, her touch surprisingly gentle as she probed the edges of the burn. "The armor took most of it, but it went deep." "I'll live," he grunted. They were trapped. The tunnel was a dead end, leading only to a secondary ventilation shaft that was sealed from the outside. They could hear the reavers trying to clear the rubble at the entrance. It was only a matter of time. They knew, Lyra whispered, her back against the cold tunnel wall. They knew exactly where to strike. The first team was a probe. This was the real attack. My lie didn't hold up, Cale said, leaning his head back, the pain in his shoulder a dull, throbbing fire. It bought me time, she said. It bought us time. She looked down at the silver locket in her hand, which she'd managed to grab before they fled. She twisted the base of it. A tiny, almost invisible seam opened, and she pressed a small stud within. A faint, pulsing blue light emanated from the device. What is that? He asked. A homing beacon, she said. Keyed to my sister's private frequency. I did not activate it before because it can be traced. But we are out of choices. You said they were dead. I said Forlag claimed they were dead, she corrected him. Xylia and Seraph. They were my sworn protectors. If they live, they will come. If, he said. The sound of shifting rock at the tunnel entrance grew louder. They live, she said, her voice filled with a sudden, fierce conviction. I know it. They waited. He was losing blood, and the darkness seemed to be closing in. Lyra tore a strip from her tunic and made a crude pressure bandage for his shoulder, her movements deft and sure. Forlag is not just a usurper, she said, her voice low in the darkness, as if the confession needed the cover of shadow. He is a zealot. He believes the Kaelin have grown weak, tainted by contact with other species. He wants to purify the Empire, return to the old ways of conquest and genetic supremacy. A classic, Cale muttered. Heard that one before. He has allied himself with the Zarkan Syndicate, she continued. Mercenaries and arms dealers. They provide him with soldiers, like the Reavers, in exchange for mining rights in our outer systems. He is selling our birthright to fund his war. It was the full story. The dirty, political truth. He cannot be allowed to hold the throne, she finished, her voice like steel. He will turn our people into monsters and lead them to ruin. The grinding at the entrance stopped. A new sound began. The high-pitched whine of a plasma torch. They were cutting their way through. Looks like your if is about to be tested, Cale said, pushing himself into a defensive position, his back against Lyra's. He had no weapon but his fists. She had only her blade. The odds were impossible. He didn't care. He would die here, on this forgotten rock, next to an alien queen. There were worse ways to go. A section of the tunnel wall behind them suddenly exploded inward, not from a plasma torch. It was cut with surgical precision, a perfect rectangle of rock falling away to reveal another tunnel, brightly lit. Two figures stood in the opening, silhouetted against the light. They were female, Kaelin, dressed in form-fitting silver combat suits. One was tall and powerfully built, a heavy plasma repeater held at the ready. The other was slighter, her face partially obscured by a holographic data screen that hovered before her eyes. Took you long enough, Xylia, Lyra said, her voice choked with relief. The warrior, Xylia, grinned. Had to make a proper entrance, little sister, she said, her voice a deep alto. You know how I love my demolitions. The other one, Seraph, deactivated her screen and gave a curt nod. The Reavers are cutting through the main entrance. We have approximately 90 seconds before they breach. Xylia gestured with her weapon. Let's move. Our ship is cloaked topside. She paused, her eyes falling on Cale, taking in his wound, his protective stance next to her sister. Her gaze was sharp, analytical. And who is this? She asked. He is Cale, Lyra said, her voice firm. He is with me. That was all she said. But it was enough. Xylia's expression softened fractionally. Then he is welcome. They scrambled through the opening, Seraph sealing the tunnel behind them with some kind of sonic device that fused the rock back together. They ran. The new tunnel was clean, prefabricated, and led directly to the surface. A corporate emergency escape route, Seraph explained without being asked. Abandoned when the mines were shut down. I found it on the moon's old survey maps. They emerged under a rock overhang, hidden from view. A sleek, silver ship, like a shard of polished obsidian, shimmered into view as its cloaking field disengaged. They boarded, the ramp hissing shut behind them. Inside, the ship was as Spartan and functional as Cale's bunker, but far more advanced. Xylia took the pilot's seat, while Seraph went to a tactical console. Strap in, Xylia commanded. It's about to get bumpy. The ship lifted off with a silent, gut-wrenching surge of acceleration. On the main view screen, Kale saw the Reaver's black transport rising to meet them. "They're hailing us," Seraph reported calmly, "demanding our surrender." "Tell them to eat vacuum," Xylia growled, her hands flying over the controls. The ship banked hard, dodging a volley of plasma fire. "Lyra," Seraph said, "you should take the gunnery turret. You have the best eye." "No," Lyra said, her attention focused on Kale's shoulder. "Xylia can handle them. He needs medical attention." Xylia glanced back, a flicker of surprise in her eyes at her sister's refusal. "Get him to the med bay," she ordered, her focus returning to the dogfight. "Seraph, reroute auxiliary power to the forward shields." Lyra led Kale to a small, sterile room. An automated medical drone whirred to life, its scanners bathing him in blue light. "Subject is human male," the drone chirped. "Extensive scarring. Third-degree plasma burn to the left deltoid. Commencing treatment." A series of articulated arms went to work, cleaning the wound, debriding dead tissue, and injecting him with a painkiller that made the world go soft at the edges. Lyra stood beside him, her hand resting on his uninjured arm. "You should be on the bridge," he said, his voice slurring slightly from the medication. "My place is here," she said simply. The ship lurched as it took a hit. "We're not going to win a straight fight," he said, forcing himself to focus. "Their ship is bigger. More guns. Xylia is the best pilot in the fleet," Lyra said with absolute confidence. "The best pilot can't change physics," he countered. "You need to stop running. You need a plan." He looked at her, his vision clearing as his mind fought the sedatives. "Forlag has a base," he said. "A command center." "Where is it?" Lyra looked at Seraph, who had appeared in the doorway. "He has repurposed the old Imperial listening post on Clendithu," Seraph said. "It's a fortress built into an asteroid. Heavily shielded. Virtually impregnable." "Nothing is impregnable," Kale said. "It has to have a weakness. A power source. A ventilation shaft. Something." Seraph considered this. "Its primary power core is shielded," she said, "but it relies on a network of thermal exhaust ports to vent excess heat. They are small, ray-shielded, but physically vulnerable." "There," Kale said, a plan forming in his hazy mind. "We don't attack the fortress. We attack the ports. Overload the core. Make it cook itself from the inside out." "A surgical strike," Lyra breathed, her eyes lighting up. "It could work." "It is a suicide mission," Xylia's voice crackled over the ship's intercom. "I'm listening." Kale, Lyra, and her two sisters spent the next cycle planning. They used the ship's superior engines to outrun the Reaver transport, losing it in a dense asteroid field. Then they turned back. They were no longer fugitives. They were fighters. The plan was simple and insane. Xylia would pilot the ship on a high-speed trench run along the asteroid's surface, using its natural geography to evade the fortress's main batteries. Seraph would use the ship's electronic warfare suite to create a ghost signal, drawing the bulk of their fighter patrols away. Lyra and Kale would take the gunnery turrets. It all came down to a 60-second window. As they approached Clendithu, the fortress loomed in the view screen, a jagged monstrosity of metal and rock bristling with weapon emplacements. "This is it," Xylia said, her voice steady. "Let's give them hell." The ship dove. Alarms blared as they skimmed the asteroid's surface, canyon walls a gray blur on either side. Laser fire stitched the space above them. Kale was strapped into the lower gunnery turret, his hands gripping the controls. His shoulder was wrapped in a regenerative cast, the pain a dull memory. Lyra's voice came over his calm and clear from the upper turret. "Targets acquired. I have the forward ports." "I have the aft," he replied. They fired in unison. Twin bolts of coherent energy lanced out, striking two of the thermal ports. They exploded in showers of sparks. "Direct hits," Seraph confirmed. "Reactor temperature is climbing." "Enemy fighters inbound," Xylia warned. A squadron of small, agile ships dropped into the trench behind them. "I'll take them," Kale said. He swiveled the turret, his targeting reticle locking onto the lead fighter. He fired, and the ship vanished in a brief, bright flash. Lyra, meanwhile, was methodically taking out the remaining exhaust ports, her shots precise and deadly. They worked in perfect sync. He covered their retreat while she focused on the primary objective. "2 ports left," Seraph called out. Reactor approaching critical. A heavy cannon emplacement on the canyon rim locked onto them. I can't evade that, Xylia shouted. Before anyone could react, Kale swiveled his turret and fired everything he had, not at the fighters, but at the canyon wall above the gun emplacement. The superheated rock flash fractured. A massive landslide of rock and debris crashed down, burying the cannon moments before it fired. The ship rocked from the shockwave. Nice shot, human, Xylia grunted in appreciation. Last port, Lyra announced. She fired. The bolt struck home, and deep within the fortress, something massive ruptured. A chain reaction of explosions blossomed across the asteroid's surface. Reactor core is breached, Seraph yelled. The whole rock is going to blow. Xylia pulled the ship up, engines screaming as they fought to escape the blast radius. The viewscreen filled with white light. The ship shuddered violently, thrown forward by the shockwave. Then, silence. Behind them, the Klendathu fortress was gone, replaced by an expanding cloud of dust and vaporized rock. They had done it. A transmission came through, unencrypted, broadcast across all Imperial channels. It was Lord Forlag, his face a mask of cold fury on their screen, broadcasting from his command ship safely outside the blast zone. You have won nothing, cousin, he snarled. You have destroyed a listening post and proven you are nothing but a terrorist. This act will only strengthen my resolve. The Empire will be purified. The transmission cut out. He's right, Seraph said quietly. We won the battle, but this gives him the political cover he needs to declare martial law. Then we must face him, Lyra said, her voice ringing with authority. She had entered the bridge, her face set like stone. No more hiding. No more running. We take the fight to the throne world. The journey to Kalen Prime was tense. With Forlag's propaganda machine painting Lyra as a destructive radical, they had few allies to call upon. But Seraph was a genius at slicing through encrypted networks. She found a handful of loyalist commanders, old allies of Lyra's family, who were willing to risk everything in a single, decisive strike against Forlag's flagship. The final battle took place in the high orbit of the throne world, a jewel of green and blue. It was a desperate gamble. Their small fleet of loyalist ships against Forlag's command carrier, the Iron Fist. Xylia led the assault, her silver ship a phantom darting through the chaos of battle. But their goal was not to destroy the Iron Fist. It was to board it. Kale, Lyra, Xylia, and a small team of loyalist commandos used the battle as cover, their ship docking with the massive carrier via a magnetic clamp. They cut through the hull and fought their way to the bridge. It was a blur of plasma fire, hand-to-hand combat, and Kale and Lyra moving as one. He laid down suppressing fire while she advanced with her blade. She drew the enemy's attention while he flanked them. They reached the bridge, the blast doors hissing open to reveal Lord Forlag, surrounded by his personal guard. He was a hulking Kalen, his face scarred and cruel. So, the little queen comes to reclaim her toy, he sneered. I have come to end your madness, Forlag, Lyra said, her voice cold. Challenge accepted, he roared, drawing a massive power axe. Trial by combat. For the throne. He lunged at her. Kale moved to intercept, but Xylia put a hand on his chest. This is her fight, she said grimly. The duel was savage. Lyra's speed and grace against Forlag's brute strength. Her blade against his axe. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed. They were evenly matched, but Forlag was stronger. He battered her defenses, forcing her back. With a final, powerful swing, he knocked her blade from her hand. It skittered across the deck. He raised his axe for the killing blow. The Empire is mine, he bellowed. Kale didn't hesitate. He broke from Xylia's hold, throwing himself in front of Lyra. He had no weapon, only his body. A shield. The axe came down. Kale braced for the impact, for the end. It never came. Lyra had dropped to one knee, not in defeat, but to retrieve the serrated knife Kale had taken from her on that first night. The one she now carried strapped to her boot. As Forlag's axe descended, she surged upward, driving the shorter blade up under his arm, deep into his heart. The usurper froze, a look of utter disbelief on his face. The power axe fell from his lifeless fingers with a deafening clang. He collapsed to the deck. Silence. The remaining personal guard dropped their weapons and knelt. The battle was over. Days later, the Grand Hall of the Imperial Palace was filled to capacity. The nobles, the military commanders, the guild masters of the Kalan Empire were all assembled. Lyra stood on the dais, no longer a fugitive in rags, but a queen in robes of state, a silver circlet on her brow. She had just been coronated. Empress Lyra the Arena. My people, she began, her voice amplified throughout the hall. We have endured a time of darkness, of betrayal and division. But that time is over. We will rebuild. We will be strong not through conquest and purity, but through unity and honor. Her gaze swept the crowd, finally landing on Kale. He was standing in the shadows at the side of the hall, uncomfortable in the formal Kalan attire they had given him. He was a ghost at the feast, an outsider who did not belong. He had planned to leave after the ceremony, slip away back to the fringes where he belonged. I did not achieve this victory alone, Lyra continued, her voice ringing with conviction. One stood by me when all others had fled. A warrior from a distant world, a man of quiet courage and unwavering honor. She looked directly at him. Kale of Earth, she called out. Step forward. A murmur went through the crowd. All eyes turned to him. He felt 100 different kinds of panic. Xylia gave him a sharp nudge from behind. He walked forward stiffly, emerging from the shadows into the bright light of the hall, feeling utterly exposed. He stopped at the foot of the dais and gave a short, awkward bow. Lyra descended the steps until she was standing before him. You saved my life, she said, her voice softer now, for him alone. You saved my world. You saved me. I just finished what they started, he mumbled, repeating the old line. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face. In my culture, she said, raising her voice once more for the entire hall to hear. A bond forged in battle, sealed in sacrifice, is the most sacred of all. It is a life debt that can only be paid with a life. She took his hand. I offer you mine. She turned to the assembled nobles. I claim him as my prince consort, she declared, her voice unshakable. He will stand beside me. He will be my shield, my counsel, and my king. A collective gasp went through the hall. Marrying an alien? A human? It was unheard of. But no one dared to challenge her. Her power, her victory, was absolute. She leaned in and kissed him, there in front of her entire empire. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss from the bunker. It was a kiss of promise, of ownership, of a shared future. The hall erupted in thunderous applause. Later that night, in the Empress's private chambers, Kale stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. He was still trying to process the day's events. A prince consort. A king. It was insane. Lyra came to stand beside him, wrapped in a simple silk robe. A cage of gold is still a cage, he said quietly. Is that what this is to you? She asked. I don't know what this is, he admitted. I'm a scavenger, Lyra. A loner. I don't belong here. You belong where I say you belong, she said, her tone softening. You belong with me. She took his hand. There are, however, she added, a mischievous glint in her eye, some formalities. Traditions of the royal bonding. I figured, he said with a wry grin. What is it? Do I have to wrestle a tarred beast? Swear a blood oath on some glowing rock? Nothing so barbaric, she said. The chamber doors opened. Xylia and Seraph entered, also in simple robes. They each carried a ceremonial pillow. According to ancient law, Seraph began, her voice as dry and precise as ever. The consort's first duty is to prove his stamina and devotion to the royal bloodline. The wedding bed, Xylia added, a dangerous smirk on her face, is not a private affair. It is a test, one he must face with the Empress. She paused for dramatic effect. And her sworn shields. Kale stared at them. At Lyra's amused expression. At Xylia's challenging grin. At Seraph's completely neutral, factual gaze. He looked from one sister to the next. His mind finally put the pieces together. The full, staggering implication of their words hit him like a physical blow. You have got to be kidding me, he breathed. Lyra's smile widened. Welcome to the family, my king.